It really is a privilege to speak to you today, and it's very gratifying to see the great turnout. And this partnership has been terrific for a lot of years with Macular Vision Research Foundation. We actually started doing seminars like this before we hooked up with Macular Vision, who came to us. We were privileged to be their test case for this kind of a seminar, and they eventually spread them to 26 cities, I think. And they followed our formats. And some of the people we have involved have done a terrific job with these. But going back, I think, well over 25 years, maybe close to 30 years, we put on our first symposium in-house, Retina Associates. We did it at the Cleveland Sight Center because there was such a need to promulgate this information, because I don't have an hour to speak to each of you when I see you. And as you can see, we're going to have a program that's at least 2.5 hours here, and we don't even scratch the surface in terms of the information. I'm going to confine myself today to some almost entirely to leading edge, very new material. Most of it is actually a little over a month old in terms of when it was really published. But in that first seminar we did probably about 30 years ago, we filled the Sight Center. Speak up. Hearing? Really? Usually I'm too loud. You let me know if you don't hear me. You let me know if I'm too loud. Let me know anything, anytime, and you can ask questions anytime. I have slides, but I have far fewer than I usually use for a talk this length, so we have time to do this, to discuss things. The Sight Center, we had the first, and they're well represented here, the Sight Center. We had our first seminar, filled the Sight Center. It was a pouring rain day. The remarkable part of it, however, is that people waited outside in the rain, and we filled it a second time. We just repeated the whole thing for the group that the fire department people would not let us overstuff the facility. So it became apparent to us that this sort of thing is important. And the next times that we did it on our own, we did it at the Renaissance, the big hotel downtown that had the biggest ballroom in the city. We ended up pretty much filling that. So these things are really very important, and we're proud to participate in them because we think that the information's important. Now, I've learned that the most important thing I can do before I forget and get into the talk is thank a lot of people that are involved with this. First, you heard already from Diane Weiss and Trina. I thought those talks were brilliant. I really do. I expected them to be, but they exceeded my expectations. Janet Delventhal had a lot to do with the PR that we got to communicate with all of you. She's our practice liaison at Retina Associates. Wendy and Mary, you all met at the reception desk, and they've contributed to this program. Anna Marie, you should know, I don't know if it's clear, that Anna Marie's in that corner there, not because she's been a bad girl, but because you filled the rest of the space. Anna Marie actually works for the Arctic companies that I'll be talking about in the talk, a large part of the talk, and she works out of our main office in Beechwood and has a lot of information for you, and she's someone that'll be a resource to many of you for some of the things I'm talking about. Kim Dubois, what can I say? I could talk about her for an hour. She really has been the key person to keep together these symposia with Macular Vision Research Foundation. And during the talk, you'll hear that she's also been coordinator for several of the studies that Diane's already mentioned some of them, but ones that relate to my talk specifically, she happens to was the coordinator for those. We have Elaine and John from the 4C home device, which I'll be discussing in my talk, so I won't go into more detail. John Flanagan's, we've worked with him for years in many different capacities. Debbie Kogler's a regular at these things. She does a fantastic job, not only at these things, but in her own shop and with her magnifiers and more service that she provides, and she really provides a great service. And she's accompanied by Kathy and Lee, whom I hope you have met. Again, the Cleveland Sight Center is represented, and Tom Sawyer is here for the Cleveland Sight Center. And then last and certainly not least, Macular Vision Research Foundation. You met Dawn, George, and Lynn Rinaldi by now, and they do a terrific job with these kinds of seminars and with other things and with funding research in macular degeneration. So now that I've done that, we can get to the beginning of the talk, and that includes a brief overview of the fact that there really it's an increasing disease, and it's increasing in large part because the population's aging. So people are living much longer, and in my office on any given day there are always at least a half a dozen people well into their 90s. And to me this is very gratifying because most of the time the majority of them are quite sharp. So we want to keep their vision as sharp as possible. And there are over 2 million new cases per year in the United States of age-related macular degeneration. Yes?
Put it on the full screen.
Sure. Is it not? Yeah. I thought it was.
Oh.
I thought I did, but
No.
Yeah, I thought I did. Here, we'll go here. You're not connected.
If you right, oh no.
Kim does a great job, except she sabotaged me. I did put it on full screen, but we can. Let's close out and start again. PowerPoint. All right.
Okay. Okay.
Now
if
I'll
we
right-click, but
yeah, scroll there.
yeah, I had full screen before.
There.
Is it bigger? Okay. And she's right again. You don't want to see my credit. So, almost 30 million people in the United States have macular degeneration. It's incredible. That's ARIDS 2, 3, and 4, different categories of it that I'll be talking about. And you already heard a little about the ARIDS study. More than 7 million people have the intermediate form, which is what we're focusing on when we talk about some of the vitamin stuff I'll be telling you about and the genetic testing. 10,000 baby boomers a year, 10,000 baby boomers every day turn 65 in the United States. So at 65, the incidence of macular degeneration starts going up. And at 75, it's up more. And at 85, it's a very steep curve. And if you're 95 without macular degeneration, you're doing something right, because a large percentage of the population in their 90s are going to have this disease. It's just the way it is. So there are 550 new cases of CNV, that's choroidal neovascularization, the abnormal vessels that Diane alluded to that we've studied extensively. And the big point is, all this, we've been doing this for decades now, these studies. And the first anti-VEGF drug that she mentioned was Macugen. And we were the lead recruiters in the world, and I was on the scientific advisory board, and we went through that from day one, and the excitement. It took a long time, of course, took years, but we went through all these studies. You have to do 3 phases of studies to get them approved by the Food and Drug Administration. I happen to be privileged to be at the FDA hearing for Macugen when it was being considered for approval, one of the most exciting times scientifically. A very interesting full-day thing preparing for that here, and we prepared for that hearing for a long time. Then we happened to be, the Scientific Advisory Board happened to be meeting the weekend that we heard from the FDA that it was approved, and that was truly exciting. And then all these other drugs that followed, we've been in many of these studies, and it's been very exciting to have the privilege to participate in these advances that are incredible, far beyond what I ever dreamed we'd be able to do with this disease when I started my training. And the first year I was at Johns Hopkins, and I was the third year of the fellowship. And the first fellow did laser work on macular degeneration, did some studies, and I reviewed those cases 2 years later, and the results were abysmal. I mean, it was really bad. And we have come so far that it's very gratifying to do this work now. Half of all CNV, again, is choroidal neovascularization, the abnormal vessels that leak and bleed, like you see the bleeding here. And half of all the cases that we see are referred too late. In other words, the vision is already down substantially. We already know that we can prevent progression of this disease, of the wet form of the disease, in over 90% of patients with the drugs that we now have from all these studies. So we have a treatment, and it's very, very effective. And Diane went into some of the business about these injections. And frankly, if you see 90-year-old ladies coming back every month, it can't be that, they're coming back. We're not dragging them back. So it's very, very tolerable. And the trick now is to get the patients early enough so that we're preserving the vision, maintaining the vision while it's still good. And that's a lot of the focus of this talk. Now, macular degeneration, again, is increasing. More than half of the wet patients are referred too late. And many of them will never get functional vision back. They'll see, and they'll have side vision, they'll be able to get around, but they won't have functional vision. They won't drive a car. They won't be able to read. So the key is to get them earlier. The ARID supplements that many of you are on, since many of you are our patients, and all across the country and really across the world, these ARID supplements are being recommended a specific formulation based on the study, on the ARID studies. And again, Kim was the coordinator for us for the ARIDS 2 study. And pretty much everybody's recommending those things. I'm going to be discussing macular risk PG, which is pharmacogenetic testing that will help us personalize the prescription better in a lot of cases and give us better results. And that's the stuff that Anna Marie is representing here. We can optimize the ARIDS vitamins that can prevent AMD progression and optimize also the treatment plan in terms of how closely we should monitor the patients, how frequently we should see them. Now, just to review, I didn't put in any slides but this on the macular photocoagulation studies. Diane alluded to those studies where we were doing thermal laser, burning vessels, the choroidal neovascularization, when it was away from the center of vision. That's the main place that we could treat it. And even if it was just up to it, we found we could do quite well. But there were many studies in that group of studies, big NIH study. 15 years I was a principal investigator in these studies. What I want to emphasize for this talk is that the other eye, the eye that was not treated, was always just one eye we treated. The fellow eye, the untreated eye, ended up being a very valuable resource because we had all this great data over all these studies with lots of patients, very carefully controlled, and the information was carefully collated. And it gave us the natural history of the other eye, the untreated eye. And by analyzing the other eye, we learned a great deal about the risk factors that lead to progression of this disease, and progression from dry macular degeneration to advanced macular degeneration, or from dry to wet macular degeneration. Much of what we know about what we call the phenotypic factors that we can use to form a prognosis or decide whether you should be seen once a year or once every 6 months or once every 3 months. Much of that is from those macular photocoagulation studies. And we know, for example, you may have heard the word drusen, those little fine yellow things I showed you in the first slide that later progressed to the hemorrhage. We know that when they're very small, the risk is much less. When they're very large, the risk is more. When they're large and they clump together or confluent, then the risk is higher. When they're associated with pigment disturbance, with dark pigmentation, indicating a disruption of the retinal pigment epithelium under the retina, that's a higher risk as well. So all of these risk factors, we know exactly how to grade them, and they give us a pretty good idea how closely we should follow patients. And that's what these are the things we look for, so we tell you when to come back. But now with the other material, these other factors that I'm going to introduce, we can define even better how well you should be monitored, and as you'll see, even define the treatment better for the earlier stages of the disease to minimize the number of people that progress to advanced disease. Now, I'm going to talk about this 4C home device that's represented here in a little bit. But before that, I'll point out there are many other things that we've tried to do to get you to be able to be seen earlier in the course of the disease. In other words, get you to be seen while you're just starting to convert from dry to wet, so we can catch it early. Maybe the vision's still 20/20 or 20/25, and we can keep it there in over 90% of patients. So, for example, many of you have been given an Amsler grid, and the family members know that patients are supposed to look at this grid pattern, the squares. And so I decided not to show you a grid because you've seen it probably hundreds of times. And you should look at it every day if you have moderate risk factors, and at least a couple times a week if you've been told you have early macular degeneration. It takes about 5 seconds, and it's completely non-invasive. And if you just keep it in one place in your bathroom or in your kitchen or whatever, it's pretty easy to do. And if you see a change, a little change, don't panic. If you see a little more change the next day, don't quite panic. You see it progressively changing over a period of several days, panic. No, don't panic. Just call and get examined. Because I'd rather you come in 10 times for no good reason at all than to miss that 11th time that really mattered. That's really important. You can't be embarrassed to want to bother the doctor or the staff or whatever. If you have to be a little bit assertive with the receptionist, that's fine too. Now, there are other new things we're trying. For example, we have an app on the iPhone. A friend of mine, Mark Blumenkrantz, who's the chairman at Stanford, I'm on his scientific advisory board for this thing. He's got an app that you can do a lot of these different tests, vision tests, color vision tests, Amsler grid that I just described on this, and it gets reported electronically and so on. And we are into that. We've been into that for a while, and people that are that like to do that, that's a nice thing. But that's not, the scientifically how well we're going to do with that. All these things are going to help. But this 4C home study device is something we've studied for years now. And it was founded in 2000, and early on I had consulted for the company, or not formally consulted, free consultant, if you will, but I met them at meetings all the time and talked to them many times about this. And one of my close friends in Israel, the chairman of one of the departments there, Anat Lowenstein, has been active clinically with them. And the original device was called the Perferential Hyperacuity Perimetry. And it was office-based. We tested patients in the office, and we studied it in the office in a formal study from 2007, 2010. And we enrolled 27 patients, which was, one of the good enrolling sites. And they ended up, based on some of that information and their earlier information, getting approval to do this 4C home monitoring system. And we studied that, the actual prototype for what they're going to show you here, we studied that with in-office study as well. And we entered 23 patients in that study, and ultimately the Data and Safety Monitoring Committee for that study determined that patients did present to the doctor earlier with that device, and they had significantly better vision when they presented, and we were able to preserve better vision, therefore, and the device was approved for home use. So what you're going to see here is approved for home use. Now, the next big thing I'm going to talk about, the new big thing, though, is going to relate to vitamins and the genetics of vitamins. First, I'll review again quickly. You see the minerals that were in the ARIDS2 formulation. You'll see them again on other slides. And that's how we treat dry macular degeneration, or how it's being treated across the world, really, today, based on that study. And again, Kim was our coordinator for that study. We entered a lot of patients in that study. The VEGF inhibitors, all the VEGF inhibitors, the main ones we use are Avastin, Lucentis, and Eylea. Avastin is the one that's still not approved for the eye, but it's approved for colon cancer, and when a drug is approved by the FDA, you can use it off-label for other things. And because for colon cancer they inject it in a vein, it's a certain dose. That dose, the systemic dose that's injected for those patients, can be divided up by a compounding pharmacy into many, many doses, and that's what makes it affordable. The other two drugs aren't affordable unless your insurance covers the whole thing, because the Lucentis is $2,000 a dose, and if you don't have not only insurance to cover it, but co-insurance to cover the copay, which would be $400, it's prohibitive, because it's not a one-time thing. It's repeated frequently. And the same thing with Eylea. It's a little cheaper. It's $1,850. And they both work great. All three of these drugs work great. We were big in the CAT study, which compared them, as Diane mentioned, and we don't have to go into that anymore. There's some other drugs. The Macugen, the original first drug, I still use for certain high-risk patients that have had recent strokes and so on for various reasons I won't go into. I was the first author on the 3-year safety data of that. It's a very safe drug, and I use it in occasional patients, but it's not as powerful as the other three. The macular risk information, there are two types of information that we get from this genetic testing. One is prognosis of your 2, 5, and 10-year risk of progressing from dry to wet macular degeneration or from early to advanced macular degeneration. The other kind of information relates to specifically what vitamins and what antioxidants and minerals you should take optimally, rather than just everybody taking the AREDS2 formulation. So those are the things, and this will be repeated. And this slide is, of course, complex, but it shows you there's a good scientific paper, and there are many scientific papers actually, that show clearly that the predictive power of this test and this approach, which was based on an algorithm that this Joanna Seddon, who has done a lot of work in this field, that she developed, the number 0.88 and 0.89, those are huge numbers in terms of being very statistically significant. Now, the components of these tests, the tests that we actually do, are not just the genetic component, which is the most complex, and I'll explain parts of it. I won't try to give you a course on genetics. First of all, I'm not qualified, and secondly, we don't have the time. But we do take into consideration, and so do they in their reports, the diagnosis of macular degeneration and the coding and the size of the drusen and the anatomical features that we've learned to look at, which are called phenotype features. We take into consideration age, basal metabolic index, smoking status, and education, all of which are very well known to correlate with progression of macular degeneration. So smoking is a big risk factor, for example. Age is the number one risk factor. If you're in your mid-90s, your risk is much higher than if you're in your mid-60s. But the genetics turn out to add to all that information from the other two groups. And this is a little bit complex, this slide, but it shows you the four different AREDS categories. That it shows you progression from one to the other, and it shows you the fact that the prognosis really overlaps. If you're an AREDS 3, then you could have a risk somewhere between 20 and 40, almost 45% of progression. If you're to AREDS 4, and similarly, in the AREDS 2 category, it could have a 1 to 18% risk of 5-year progression. So there's a broad range, and that's what the genetic testing helps us narrow down and be more specific for a given patient. There's one group that has been into this whole area of investigation earlier, and they were there at the very beginning of this testing, and that's a group in Tennessee. They're similar size to us, and we have 9 retinal specialists in our group. They have a similar size group, and they've been into this for a long time, and they showed that without genetic analysis, the average visual acuity at presentation of their patients was 2145, which was poor vision, not really functional. It was much better, the average patient referred to them, if they did a genetic analysis. Now we all know, and that's with even the first eye. We all know that the second eye, we see patients much sooner because they figured it out. This is not good to wait because they lost their vision in their first eye and they come in sooner. But what we really need to do is get both eyes early and preserve vision in both eyes. The suggested treatment plan the monitoring, how frequently we see the patient, is based on this genetic testing. And the other factor is the risk of zinc, most importantly, zinc and antioxidants, the benefits of each in which patients. And this is a little tricky to explain. Overall, again, about a 25% risk reduction in the ARID studies of antioxidants plus zinc, which everybody is getting, until about a month ago. This just shows you the difference between the ARIDS 2 and the original ARIDS 1 formulation. And and that's been discussed already by Diane to some extent, and lutein and zeaxanthin replacing beta-carotene. 80 milligrams of zinc, notice. That's a high dose of zinc. This paper came out. This is the key paper for much of the rest of this talk. And it came out 2 days before the American Society of Retinal Specialists meeting in Toronto, which was about a month ago. Thank God it came out then, because we couldn't have presented I presented a paper followed by 2 other people who presented papers on the genetics of macular degeneration at that meeting. And that was 1 month ago. So a lot of this information is brand new, and that's what I'm focusing on. And all 3 of us are on the scientific advisory board of this Arctic company. And what was found is that if you have 2 alleles, there are 2 particular genes that we look at that are important in determining the risk of, and the best vitamins and minerals to use for macular degeneration. One, I won't go in detail on both, but just to show you as an example, CFH is one of them, and the other is called ARMS2. We'll mention that later, but if you're at low risk for CFH, then you do, the group that was at low risk of for CFH and got zinc in the ARID study had a much better prognosis than the group that was at high risk for CFH and got zinc. And the patients that got a placebo were in between. Now this shows you what low and high risk is. Each of these, the CFH and the ARMS2, I don't expect you to completely understand this, and it looks imposing, but really it's pretty simple. You can have 0, 1, or 2 alleles for each of these things. And it shows you 0 on top so that it was dark. Now, that gives you a total of 9 combinations on the bottom, which isn't critical to you. And what is critical, if you really understood this one slide, which took me a long time to figure out, by the way, you will see that the patients who have 2 risk alleles for CFH, they do much better with antioxidants only, but not so well with zinc. We don't want to give them zinc. And the opposite is true for people who have 2 of the ARMS2 alleles. So they do much better with zinc alone, nothing else. When I say that, I want you to understand that 2/3 of the patients in the ARID studies got Centrum Silver, essentially. They got, a multivitamin. So nobody's telling you to stop your multivitamins and the little bit of zinc that's in those multivitamins. Zinc is an essential mineral, but this is a high dose that's in these things, 80 milligrams, a lot of these patients were given. It's probably too much. I mean, even in the ARIDS 2, it was found that the 25 milligrams did just as well as the 80 milligrams. So somewhere between 25 and 80 for people that should take zinc, which are the people that have two of these arms too, or even one of the arms too, and not one of the other. You don't have to completely understand that. What you need to understand is that now with this genetic testing, we can define a group of patients that should be getting exactly what they've been getting, a group of patients that should get only antioxidants, and another group of patients that should get only zinc. And some people, and that'll be repeated enough times here in different ways that it may come together. The difference, based on what we know, and you don't need to know all these numbers, but the difference when we do add that sort of information is quite dramatic. You can see the progression at 10 years, the difference when we separate out, when people have two CFH, for example, we get 28% improvement over what the standard treatment is now. And we get 26.7% improvement if there are two arms too over what the standard treatment is now. So it's really quite important. This makes it a little simpler. Everybody's getting, since 2001, the original ARID study, zinc and antioxidants. Now we can see what percentage of patients should be getting zinc and antioxidants. It's actually a clear minority. And we have certain people that should get zinc only, other people should get antioxidants only, and some people, we don't know exactly what's best, but where there's a trend, we recommend it's a little softer. And I'll get into that briefly later. This shows you that with placebo, the placebo in the ARID study, they did the worst. With the antioxidants and zinc that everybody's getting, you definitely do better. But with this kind of specific genetic testing, you can see you have a much lower risk still of progression of the macular degeneration. And this shows the same thing in a little different way in terms of the frequency of the population that it turns out that people that should be getting antioxidant and zinc are only 22.6% of the whole group. And this summarizes it all in terms of what you really want to look at mainly to make it clearest is people that have two of one, such as 2CFH and no arms too. It's really quite dramatically different. And they would get, the CFH people, we want to give them antioxidants, the ones that have predominantly CFH. And the ones that have predominantly arms too, we want to give them only zinc. And where there's a mixture, that's where we have to make some decisions based on numbers. So to summarize from the thoughts of the authors of that paper, for patients with ARIDS 2 category 3 disease in at least one eye, 49% derive more benefit from treatment regimen other than ARIDS formulas. And it's estimated that genotype-directed therapy of the study population would have more than doubled the reduction in macular degeneration progression rate compared with the standard ARIDS formulation. It's estimated that the genotype-directed therapy of the study population, So basically we're looking at two factors when we do this genetic testing. One is to establish the prognosis over 2, 5, and 10 years, and the other is to help tailor personally the treatment regimen with regard to antioxidants and zinc. This is the kind of report that comes out from that study. Now, it's easy to get zinc alone. You can get it in any drugstore, and you can get it online, and that's easy. I won't go into the details of it. But again, you can use about between 25 and 80 is probably right. So it comes in 50 milligrams, that would be fine, okay, if you're zinc alone. It's very hard to get the antioxidants without the zinc today, but the company is working toward getting that done. And this is one company, Doctors RX Optimal Formula, that has it online, and we may hook up with them to be able to provide it more easily to the patients. This again, this is less than 30 days old, so this group jumped on it right away, and there are a few others that have it available, but there aren't many other places right now. You can't go to the drugstore and get the antioxidants without zinc. And you can get the zinc anywhere and so on. So the cost of, if you have macular degeneration and if you have Medicare, this is covered. If you don't, the whole thing, both aspects of this, it's completely covered. And if you have private insurance, the company will accept $25 as the full payment. If you don't have macular degeneration or you don't have insurance, you're better off. To me, the most critical part is now the treatment. What antioxidants or zinc are we going to recommend? And then you could go and you have to pay. The suggested payment is $179 for this test to determine what vitamin you should be taking. So to conclude, macular degeneration is increasing more than 30 million people. More than half of wet macular degeneration patients are referred too late, and many of them never get functional vision back. So our goal is to get them in earlier. The ARID supplements are standard of care, but now this genome-directed therapy has just come out, and it'll take a year for it to really catch on. And don't expect every one of your eye doctors to know about it, because it just came out, and they weren't necessarily at that meeting that I just talked about. And not everybody reads that journal Ophthalmology every month, where the paper just came out. The macular risk, with that though, 90% accurate macular degeneration prognosis, optimized ARIDS vitamins can prevent AMD progression if we can minimize still further the amount of progression by using the optimal formula for you, and optimize the treatment plan and the monitoring plan, how frequently you should be seen. The swab is very easy, just a swab of the cheek. That's how they get the genetic material shipped to their laboratory from Arctic DX, and they provide some genetic counseling and other services, and there's contact. Anna Marie can tell you more about that stuff. Understand that there are laws against genetic discrimination, so don't be worried that you're going to lose your job if you have your cheek swabbed and so on. So a lot of people don't want to do this simply because they don't want to know if they're going down. They want to bury their head. But we have such powerful ways of treating this disease now. You want to know where you stand. We can, again, well over 90% we can prevent from going blind. You've seen this material. Again, to conclude, this is an increasing disease, and we now have very good ways of treating it, and we have new ways of deciding who is at risk of progressing and how fast. And I think you should take full advantage of all of this, and certainly not bury your head in the sand about this disease. You should be much more positive now, because we really have made very, very positive progress with this disease. Should I take questions, or should I save those for the end? Who is it?
Debbie's next, but if we can take a couple.
We
can take a few questions
till the bitter end, so I'll answer a few questions now that will be of interest to the entire crowd, and I'll hang around at the end to answer some that might be of less interest to the entire crowd, because those come up from time to time. Yes? I've probably answered all your questions by now.
What about the mic here?
Go ahead.
Over here.
Oh, yeah, give her,
No.
do we have a microphone?
Lynn.
Right here.
Yeah, I know. But let's do yours first, Kim. Can we do yours first?
So are you recommending for prevention of a family member, a child that has a parent with macular degeneration diagnosed, but the offspring does not? Are you recommending perhaps this genetic testing and then vitamins to be started earlier in life?
Let me make my answer clear. No and no. Okay?
Here we go, here's a question.
Dr. Singerman, if you had the swab, the saliva swab with the test, and it takes 4 to 5 weeks to get the results, does that reduce the number of injections that you would have with your eyes if the results are good or not good?
Not really, because this is really aimed at identifying earlier before you require injections. So we don't really know, once you're in advanced macular degeneration and require injections, we really don't know if the antioxidants make that much difference. All these ARID studies were done on patients with early or intermediate disease, not advanced disease. So we don't know how much any of these antioxidants or which combination is important once you have advanced disease. But if you have advanced disease in one eye and early or intermediate disease in the other, then it would help us decide what to give you to preserve the vision in the other eye, in the second eye.
Do one more then. Yep.
The iPhone app you were talking about, is it also available on the Androids? The iPhone app you were talking about for vision, is it available for Android?
Not yet, but I expect that it will be. It's getting more and more. There's a lot of, it's kind of interesting for anyone that's comfortable with the iPhone or computers. It really is worth playing around with it. It's called, you can go to sitebook.com, and there are a lot of tests you can do by yourself. You own the data. It's your data. It gets reported to your doctor if you wish, which most people do, but it's your data, and it's a nice way to keep it categorized. But I didn't... What? Oh, yeah, I believe so, yeah. I haven't used it on iPad. It's just that everyone has their iPhone with them, and I haven't used it. I think it's available on the iPad, too.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Dr. Singerman. Great cutting-edge information.